This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers, scholars, documentary filmmakers, or simply people of all trades and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. I am now joined here in the studio by Dr. Sarab Abu Rabia-Queder from the Jacob Blaustein Institute for Desert Research at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, who specializes in higher education among Bedouin women and Bedouin women. She's a Bedouin woman herself. Hello, Sarab, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
So before we start, it might be a stupid question, but we need to get our basics covered. Please tell us who the Bedouin are and how they're different from other Arab communities in Israel.
Okay. First of all, the Bedouins are part of the Palestinian Arab community who remained in Israel after the 1948 war, and they're part of the Muslim Palestinian Arab minority in Israel, located mostly in the south of Israel. They used to rely on semi-nomadic lifestyle and relying on tribal allies between the tribes, and today they're part of the minority, the Arab minority in Israel.
But still, when we talk about the Bedouin, in the public discourse in Israel, we refer to them in other terms than the general Israeli Arabs.
This is part of the misleading public Israeli discourse that usually looks at Arabs in general or at Bedouins in particular through the cultural lenses. It is easy to look at Bedouin as not part of the Arab minority, not part of the Palestinian identity, not part of the Muslim, let's say, majority in the Middle East, but to distinguish them. It is easier to deal with them as not threatening.
But where did this distinction come from?
I think it comes from the policy of the state, what is called the politics of identity or the identity politics that used to differentiate between the various Arab minority in Israel, between Bedouins, between Druze, and also between the Christians and the other Muslim minority in Israel, in order to make it easy to control them.
Right, but whereas with Christians or Druze, as opposed to the Muslim, there is some sort of denominational or religious separation or distinction. The Bedouin are predominantly Muslim.
They are Muslims, they're also Arabs, and they're also Bedouin culturally. But what happened in the public and also recently, till recently in the academic discourse, is that Bedouin, and especially Bedouin women, used to be targeted only or framed only through the cultural lens, which is easier to deal with. Like I said, they're not threatening as a cultural
What do you mean by
identity.
cultural lens?
Cultural lens meaning that you can treat Bedouin, when you say Arabs in Israel or Palestinian, use the term, the identity Palestinian or Arabs, the majority of the people are afraid of it. For them, it's like a threat, a security threat. When you say Bedouin, it is more nice, it is less threatening.
More folkloristic,
more
perhaps?
folkloristic, more exotic, terms. Mm-hmm. Culture is something that you can deal with it, that you can also blame it. It's not threatening to the public.
And how do the Bedouin communities react to this state apparatus, as you put it? Do they accept it, or do they reject it and see themselves as part and parcel of the Palestinian Arab community?
First of all, there has been two parallel processes during the recent years. First, the NGOization, which is the evolving of the NGOs, mainly feminist NGOs in Bedouin society since the 90s, that their main objectives is to raise not only feminist agenda, but also the national agenda, also fighting for the civil rights. All this struggle actually raises the consciousness in all levels, in all spheres of life. The other aspect is the raise of the indigenous researchers from within Bedouin society, such as myself, being first PhD woman in my society. I think that those voices challenges the Israeli discourse that again, used to rely only on the cultural frame, which is easier to blame culture, to blame, for instance, if we take the issue of urbanization, okay, so the culturalist point of view blames the Bedouin for not being able to adjust to urban life, instead, or to blame tradition. Their tradition is not okay. Their tradition is to blame, instead of seeing the whole complex, the power relations between the state and the minority, and how it affected their reaction to urbanization, to the forced urbanization.
Okay, so let's now go. You mentioned something very, very interesting, and that is that the development of the civil society within the Bedouin community has been mainly feminist. And that brings us to the main focus of your academic research, and that is higher education among Bedouin women. I mean, there's some sort of participant observation in it, as social scientists like to call it, because, as you said, you are a Bedouin academic woman yourself. Now, thinking about this issue, Bedouin women, while acquiring higher education, have a lot of glass ceilings to shatter. Not only the ones that are shared by every woman in the world, but also the fact that they come from rather, or very, I would say, underprivileged circles, because the Bedouin communities are really among the country's poorest, the lower tiers of Israeli society, and that reflects, of course, on the level of the secondary education, which is certainly not the best in the country, and, just being women coming from relatively or predominantly traditional backgrounds, whether it's their fault, the culturalist explanation or not, is, let's put it aside for a second. So tell me a bit about, to what extent is it really a phenomenon to be reckoned with? How many women like you have managed to shatter all those glass ceilings?
First of all, I have to say this is a typical question for an Israeli, for the Israeli press or the Israeli media. How many women like you? Again, let's not forget that 80% of the Bedouin families in Israel are below the poverty line. 90% are unemployed. This is the poorest and the most unemployed group population in Israel, okay?
90%.
90% are unemployed, only 5% academic. Now, we have to look at two processes, the political history of the Bedouin education, which affected the status of women in their enrollment to higher education. So I will speak about myself later on, but let me put it all in context. First of all, between 1948 and 67, there was a military administration here in Israel that put the Bedouin, the 11,000 remained Bedouin, in a siege area, which is a fence area, and prevented them for attending to higher education and employment. So only the sons of the notable sheikhs who had special connections with the authorities could have special permission to go and study in boarding school, British school in the north of Israel. And I can say that my father's family is part of this royalty, let's say.
Yes, aristocracy.
So all the process of enrolling into higher education and also employment started very, very late if we compare it to the mainstream Arabs in Israel and to the Jews in Israel. Only at 66, when the military administration removed and started the process, the state started the process of the forced urbanization, okay, that again, Bedouin re-enrolled into education, but the conditions were unequal in budgets, in terms of sufficient infrastructures. We have the case of the unrecognized villages where half of the Bedouin population, almost 90,000 people, remained in what is called unrecognized villages.
Those who resisted
to
the forced urbanization.
Who resisted to give up on their lands and to move to the urban settlements, which actually not very modern and urban. This is another topic. So what happened is that only at 1988, the first Bedouin woman graduated from the only university in the Negev, which is Ben-Gurion University. Myself, I graduated at 1998, and I was one of the first, one of the graduates of the first generation of women, and we were only 12 at 1998. Today, of course, there are more than 400s, and the number is rising. Okay, but this is the context. It all started late.
But also, it comes against the backdrop of gender relations within the community.
Okay, so what happened is that during those years, and my study was focused on the tribalized woman, the first generation of Bedouin women. It was a mix between political forces and patriarchal forces. When you don't have a high school in your village, and during the 70s and the 80s, there were only 2 high schools among the 7 urban villages. One in Kseife, it is a village, and one in Tel Sheva. So in order for a woman to get out to continue her education, her higher education, she needed a special permission. First of all, there were no transportations. Okay, she needed her unique and rare father's support in order to go, and he needed to fight.
But all this applies to Bedouin men as well.
For Bedouin, in patriarchal society, Bedouin men, they can travel alone. If they cannot be accepted to the Israeli universities, they always has an option to go to study abroad in an Arab country or Europe or the United States.
Which Bedouin women won't be allowed?
Nowadays, they are allowed. They are more allowed. We can see more and more Bedouin women who are not getting accepted to what they want to study, to some professions such as pharmacology and other medical professions here in Israel because of the high psychometric acceptance rate. So they go to study in other countries. You asked me how come that I challenged. First of all, I did not live the Bedouin life. I have to be honest and say it. My father is from an unrecognized village in the Negev. My mother is from northern of Israel. She's not a Bedouin. She's an Arab. Right. So my father also grew up in very difficult conditions. He grew up from the age 10 in boarding school in the north in order to get education. So for him, when you have 4 daughters and 1 son, you don't want to put them in a cage, okay? And you want to supply for them all the opportunities that you can, so they can fulfill their rights, their educational rights, their employment rights, the civil rights. So he moved to live in Beersheba, and it's a Arab Jewish city. It is not recognized as an Arab Jewish city, but a lot of Arab families from the north and from Bedouin community, academics family mainly, live in Beersheba. And since as a community, an Arab community in Beersheba, today about 20,000, we don't have any educational frames in Beersheba for the Arabs, so we had to study in a Bedouin school in Tel Sheva, which is another faraway village. So in order not to lose the identity, the language, to keep the identity.
Sure. Because there are no Arab schools
in Beersheba. Right. Okay, so at the beginning we studied in Tel Sheva, and it was not easy because also in Tel Sheva you are treated as a stranger. You're not part of the residents of the village, and also you look differently. While most of the girls used to cover their heads, me and my sisters were not covering. We didn't have that traditional look. So what we did is that, and also because the unequal, like I said, situation of education, we had to move later on to a Jewish high school in order to maximize our opportunities to higher education. And when I moved to the Jewish high school, I started to compare between the conditions of where I studied in the Bedouin school and where I am now studying. For instance, a library, which is supposed to be common in every school, we didn't have a library in Tel Sheva.
And this is something that other Bedouin women encounter only when if and when they go to university.
They go to university. So my opportunities, my road was paved in front of me because of the opportunities I had.
No, is it because your father and your family were particularly forward-looking and progressive and realized acknowledged the value of education, or does it signify a larger process of the erosion of patriarchy within the Bedouin society and some sort of opening up?
For my father came from a very educated family. Like I said, my grandfather, which I never met, he had 8 sons and 3 daughters. He sent all his sons to boarding schools. They're all educated.
Not his daughters, though.
Not his daughters, again, because the situation prevented it. If they had schools in nearby, I think they would, because now they send their daughters to schools. So for my father, it was a crucial thing for educating us. And also my mother, she's very educated as well. My father also was the first Bedouin physician from his community. So I felt like he had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, mainly because he was a father of 4 daughters and then and a son. So you have to prove to society that even if you are a father of daughters, which is something not very accepted, legitimate in Bedouin society,
it's looked down upon.
Exactly. So you have to prove that your daughters, mainly living among the Jews, that they are well educated.
Right.
So I think this was one of his.
And do you see, according to your personal experience and the case studies that you look into as part of your research, is really education the key to success for Bedouin women?
I think yes. First of all, if you look at all the NGOs, the feminist NGOs today in Bedouin society, all of the initiators of this organization, or of those women who make the change, who feel burned for their society, feel that they want to change for their society, are educated women, because they have the knowledge, they have the expertise. Also, they have they also use the professional field as a zone for change. For instance, I can speak about myself in this area as a researcher. I have also an agenda, and my agenda is not only to teach, not only to transfer knowledge, but it is also how we study traditional societies like Bedouin society, how we try to examine traditional society, not only from the cultural lenses, but also let's try other lenses. Let's try to look in broader terms on traditional society, and it's the same not only for Bedouin society but for other Muslim societies.
What do you mean broader terms?
Broader terms like let's not forget the political power relations.
Right.
My recent study, for instance, which dealt with the professional women, and I used intersectional analysis in this study. Suddenly, I discovered this analysis revealed middle-class professional women, and this class category was not used in research so far. So it's important that we take broader.
Do you draw parallels between Bedouin women and Jewish women in Israel? Do they encounter the same sort of problems in terms of higher education and glass ceilings, etc.?
I think the main way to measure it is to look at statistics. If we take employment, if we take also enrollment into higher education, unfortunately, Arab and mainly Bedouin sector is the most marginalized, is not leading, is the most population that is behind all statistics. Of course, the glass ceiling for Bedouin women is much higher than the glass ceiling for other women. And not only because institutional barriers, not only because policy, not only because culture. I'm not saying culture is not to blame or patriarchy is not to blame, but not the only reason, but also because of the image of stereotype Okay, when you look at and this is the problem with the cultural frame. When you look at Bedouin women, okay, you try. Sometimes you're surprised. Wow, she speaks Hebrew very fluently. Wow, she managed to gain a higher position. How she did it?
Her head is
she
not covered.
Her head is not covered. She's a Bedouin woman. She's supposed to be oppressed. She's not. So no, okay, and this is what my agenda in my research tried to prove to the academic discourse. To try to break this, to make these cracks, okay, in the hegemonic, essential identity of Bedouin and Muslim women.
Do you have children?
I have 3 boys.
And what kind of
my joy?
Yeah. So then, yeah, lucky for you and lucky for them. So, what kind of education are they getting?
Okay, this was a dilemma. My children study at the bilinguistic school, which is an Arab Jewish school in Beersheba, in the city, because it is very important for us to balance between identity and knowledge, identity and education, pure knowledge. I mean,
that one would not come at the expense of the other.
Unfortunately, sometimes one comes at the expense of other, because if you want to go to, if you want to emphasize the education or on your identity, okay, sometimes you miss other knowledges, okay, that the main, so you have to make this comparison, and as this balance, and as parents, very, very consciousness parents, we try to, if there is a gap, we try to fix this gap, okay, by extra private lessons and things like that. But they are very aware to what's happening. We live in Beersheba, and when they go to their grandparents in the unrecognized village where my husband come from, they always compare. Why don't they have and we have? Why don't they have building? They cannot. Why don't they live in buildings like we do? Why don't they have electricity like we do? They think also sometimes that it is their blame. They don't want to be progressed, but I explained to them, the wider context, so they would know. And it's very important for me that my children be aware and to criticize, to use criticism in their thinking, not to accept everything as taken for granted in life.
But you ended up marrying a Bedouin. This was, at the end of the day, part of your identity, of your tradition.
Exactly. I chose him, but unfortunately it was not easy. And here I can link between the personal story and the academic career and the academic story or agenda. When I met my husband, I discovered that we were not fitted according to the tribal rules. According to tribal rules, I came from a higher status tribe, and he came from what considered to be a lower status tribe. And it goes back to the history of the Bedouin who came first, who owned the lands and who did not own and who were landless. So there is a taboo, okay, in Bedouin society that we are not allowed to marry. But according to Islam, we have the right to marry because we are both Muslims. So I fought for it. It was not, again, I raised in a home that taught us that we are not taking things for granted. So for me, it was not taken for granted that I'm going to give in on my rights. This is my right according to Islam, according to Sharia, and according to human rights, universal human rights. So we had to fight for it. And of course, my parents supported us. And after 2 years, we ended.
Wait, so if your family supported you, who did you have to fight against?
I had to fight the other tribes, the tribal allies. Suddenly I discovered, again, because I lived in Beersheba, I didn't have to cope with it, to face it during my youth. But when I graduated from my first degree and I met my husband, suddenly I discovered that we have these taboo issues, and also not only that as an individual you are part or interconnected to a wider tribe, and this tribe is connected in allies to another wider and wider links to another tribes. Suddenly these whole tribes, okay, fought and resisted my marriage, my choice. So in a certain time, also in a certain period of this struggle, my fight stopped to be on a fight, on a man, because you're not sorry, but you're not worth to fight for. No, this is only a joke. My husband,
sure.
yes, my husband was worth to fight for, but it was a fight for the choice, the right to choose. Okay, the right to choose according to all legitimate. So when I saw that,
and you won.
Of course, I won. I didn't saw any other. I didn't saw in front of me any other option. So when I saw that higher education gave me, autonomy, gave me individuality, gave me responsibility, gave me this kind of characteristics, and those characteristics came in conflict with tribal ethos, historical tribal ethos that is unfair, is unequal, is religiously illegal even. It drove me to write my PhD on the first generation of Bedouin women and the value of, or the question of, does education necessarily means enlightenment in the case of Bedouin women? After they graduate from university, from higher education institutes, what happened when they go back to their homes, to their villages, to their tribes, and want to choose a spouse? And here I found what I call the paradox of education and femininity, where Bedouin women, when went to university, it's not only encountering, a different or a strange national space, it's also a mixed space, a mixed tribal space. They met men from what I call forbidden tribes, forbidden tribal boundaries, and some of them wanted to marry with them, but the taboo, the historical ethos, tribal ethos, prevented that. So they all had to...
So the two clashed, and they had to deal with this
and there are different strategies where I elaborate in my book and in my academic papers how they deal with it. I have to say just one sentence that... some of the women, one woman told me that the only way to win this fight, because they didn't want to put their fathers in another battle in front of society, because the fathers rarely supported them to go to higher education, and now to put them in another even taboo battle, it is very heavy for them, and so they gave up. And one woman told me that she didn't want to give up, and the only way to fulfill her forbidden love is to run away with her lover.
Right.
But she, even if she planned for it, she stopped because she didn't want to put other girls in this situation, and as a role model, she didn't want people to say that an educated Bedouin woman actually violates tribal rules. So they all gave up on one norm, which is marrying outside the tribal limits in order to promote another norm, which is continue to go to higher education and
So I'd like to ask you about this. Did it not backlash because so many, or not so many, but more and more Bedouin women going out to acquire higher education causes so many social problems for the families back where they come from. So, I mean, I would assume that there would be more harsher measures against them, preventing them from going out and, putting a lid on this problem altogether.
First of all, I believe that social change won't occur without crisis, without conflicts, without clashes. This is how social change is done. In the case of Bedouin women, like I said, they had to give up on the first generation had to give up on one social norm, which is marrying outside the tribal limits, in order to promote another social norm, which is pushing other women and encouraging other women to go to higher education. They became role models. If they would violate this role model, the boundaries of this role model, they wouldn't have created a second generation of educated Bedouin women. So this is how social change is done for this generation. It's not a linear process on giving up on tradition and taking on modernity, but is more on combining them together, and mainly acting in a politics of conformity, I call it, in order to gain the trust of the community, the trust of their father, so they could proceed.
Dr. Sarab Abu Rabia-Queder, thank you so much for coming in today and for this really, really interesting and inspiring interview.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Adam Scher and Leo Peleg, the technical producers of this show. I am Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and get in touch with your comments and suggestions. See you again next week. Until then, goodbye.